I used to believe that no one in the world could hurt me the way a stranger could. I was wrong. Strangers don't know where you're weakest. Family does, and my sister knew every soft place in my heart. We grew up inseparable. Same room, same school, same secrets whispered late at night when the house was asleep. She was older, louder, more confident. I was quieter, slower, always thinking before speaking. She used to promise me that no matter what happened, we would always protect each other. I believed her without question, because who doubts their own sister? The trouble started when I chose a life that didn't fit the family's picture. I didn't rebel. I didn't disrespect anyone. I simply wanted something different, different dreams, different priorities, a different pace. At first, my sister acted supportive. She smiled, nodded, told me she understood. But support can be fake when it's spoken too sweetly. Behind my back, she began talking. She told my parents I had become arrogant. She told relatives I thought I was better than them. She said I was ashamed of my family, embarrassed by our background. Every lie was carefully dressed as concern. I'm just worried about her. She would say, she's changing. And because she was the first to speak, her words became the truth. I didn't know what was happening until I felt it. The way conversations stopped when I entered the room, the way my opinions were dismissed before I finished speaking, the way my parents looked at me like they were trying to recognize a stranger. I tried to explain myself. I cried, I defended my choices, but the more I spoke, the guiltier I sounded. My sister stayed calm, quiet, reasonable. Compared to her, I looked emotional, unstable, wrong. The night everything broke, my mother said something I will never forget. If everyone is saying the same thing, maybe you really are the problem. In that moment, my voice died. I realized I had already lost. My sister stood there, silent, eyes lowered, playing the role of the wounded hero. She didn't have to say another word. The damage was done. I packed a small bag and left the house that night. No one stopped me. No one followed. As I stepped out, I looked back one last time, hoping, just hoping. My sister would say something, anything. She didn't. That was the night my family chose her story over my truth. And it was the beginning of 13 years of silence I never asked for. Being cut off from your family doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, in small, quiet moments that hurt more than shouting ever could. The first birthday that passed without a call. The first holiday spent staring at the wall instead of a crowded table. The first emergency where there was no one to dial except myself. At the beginning, I waited. I told myself they just needed time. I replayed every argument in my head, wondering what I could have said differently, how I could have explained myself better. Some nights, I even wrote messages I never sent, hoping the right words might magically fix everything. But days turned into months. Months turned into years. I learned the sound of silence. I learned how heavy it feels when you realize your own parents have chosen not to know your life. I watched from a distance as my family continued without me, smiling in photos, celebrating milestones I was never invited to share. In every picture, my sister stood close to them, looking proud, protected, certain. I struggled in ways they never saw. I worked jobs that barely paid rent. I came home exhausted, sometimes hungry, often lonely. When things went wrong, there was no safety net, no one to remind me I wasn't alone. I cried quietly, because even my tears felt like something I had to earn. Yet something unexpected happened in that loneliness. I grew. Without constant judgment, I discovered who I really was. I learned resilience the hard way. I learned how to sit with pain instead of running from it. I met people who didn't know my past, who listened to me without bias, who chose me simply because of who I was. They became my family in ways blood never managed to be. From time to time, I heard whispers about my sister, how responsible she was, how much she had sacrificed, how she had warned everyone about me. My absence had become proof of her story, and still I said nothing. Silence became my strength. While my name was spoken with disappointment, my hands were busy building a life. While they judged the person I used to be, I was becoming someone stronger, calmer, unbreakable. Each year without them hurt less, not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped needing their approval. By the time 13 years had passed, I no longer dreamed of going back to who I was before. I had survived the worst kind of abandonment and learned to stand on my own, and deep down, I knew one thing with certainty: when the truth finally surfaced, it would not need my anger to be powerful. I never planned to see them again. In my mind, my family belonged to a closed chapter, painful, finished, and better left untouched. But life has a way of reopening doors when you least expect it. The invitation came through a distant relative, casual and uncertain, as if my presence was a rumor rather than a fact. I almost said no. Old wounds don't beg to be reopened. They simply ache, but something inside me was calm. For the first time in 13 years, I wasn't afraid. When I walked into the room, the air changed. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Faces turned slowly, carrying shock, curiosity, and discomfort all at once. I recognized everyone, yet felt like a stranger among them. 13 years of absence had done what no argument ever could. It had rewritten who I was in their minds. I didn't rush to explain myself. I greeted them politely, smiled softly, and took a seat as if I belonged there. My calm confused them more than anger ever would have. They were waiting for the emotional girl they remembered, the one who cried and defended herself too much. She never showed up. Instead, I spoke when spoken to. I answered questions honestly, without bitterness. I talked about my work, my struggles, the life I had built from nothing. There was no bragging, no blame. Just truth, steady and unembellished. Then someone asked the question my sister had controlled for years. Why did you really leave? The room went silent. I felt every eye turn toward me, and toward her. I took a breath and told the story the way it had actually happened. I spoke of the whispers that came before the accusations, of words twisted into intentions I never had. I mentioned messages, conversations, and moments that had been carefully rearranged. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply placed the truth on the table and let it sit there. My sister tried to interrupt, but the confidence she once wore so easily had cracked. Her version of the story had never faced the original voice before. Facts don't argue, they wait, and that day they waited patiently. I watched realization move across familiar faces. Regret softened their expressions. Questions followed quiet ones, careful ones. For the first time, they weren't listening to her. They were listening to me. I felt no triumph, no anger, just a strange peace, because the truth had finally walked into the room, and it didn't need my permission to stay. The moment the truth had spoken, everything shifted. My family's eyes, once cold and judging, now reflected confusion, shame, and a hint of sorrow. Some stared at me as though seeing a stranger, but I knew they were finally seeing me. I could feel the weight of 13 years of lies and misunderstandings lift from my shoulders, and for the first time, I realized that revenge doesn't always need to hurt someone. It can simply be quiet, undeniable, and complete. Apologies came slowly. My parents spoke first, their voices trembling, unsure if the bridge between us could ever be rebuilt. They said words I had longed to hear, words I almost didn't believe could be true. We were wrong. We should have listened. We should have trusted you. Some family members hugged me, some simply nodded, and a few avoided my gaze entirely. My sister, she stood frozen, her face pale, the confident mask she had worn for so long finally crumbling. She wanted to speak, to explain, perhaps even to manipulate, but she had no words that could undo the quiet power of truth. I forgave them. I forgave them all not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness didn't mean I returned to the old life, didn't mean I erased 13 years of hurt or allowed them to control my heart again. I forgave because holding on to that anger would have kept me tied to the past, chained to the very people who had cut me off. I didn't take their invitations or accept any immediate attempts to reconnect. I didn't need to. Sweet revenge isn't in shouting or shaming. It's in rising above. It's in living a life so full, so independent, and so undeniably true that those who tried to diminish you can only watch in stunned silence. By walking away with grace, I showed that I no longer required their approval or their validation. My sister, once so proud of controlling the narrative, realized too late that her power over me had vanished long ago. And in that realization lay my peace. 13 years ago, they chose her story over my truth. Today, they saw the truth, and I didn't need them to choose me. I had already chosen myself. I had built a life rooted in strength, resilience, and dignity, and nothing they could say or do would take it away. When I finally left that gathering, I walked with my head high, shoulders steady, and heart light. The chapter wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about exposing or humiliating. It was about proving to myself that even after betrayal, even after silence, I could reclaim my life entirely. And that, walking away whole, unbroken, and unapologetically alive, was the sweetest revenge of all.